Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm Pete.
And I'm Maureen, and we're the Sonic Boomers.
Yep, the Sonic Boomers podcast, episode number 116. And we're going to be talking and reminiscing about the 1964-1965 World's Fair.
In New York.
But before we do that, I want to invite those of you that are just listening to the podcast on Spotify or any of the many platforms that we're on, and I think we're on all of them these days. You want to watch us on YouTube, especially for this show, because I am an example of sartorial splendor today. I am wearing my beloved polo shirt that I just got a few months ago, and I love this polo shirt. It is just gorgeous, if I do say so myself, and I will say so.
So tune into YouTube and you decide.
And you decide.
Whether Pete's nuts or not.
It's from a company called Sunday Swagger. Before we get into the show, we want to invite you to A, tell me how good I look in this shirt. And B, see, I'm going to keep going back to this shirt all through the show.
It's going to be ubiquitous, if you ask me.
The New York World's Fair was 2 seasons. It ran season number 1 from April 22nd to October 18th, 1964. The second season was April 21st to October 17th, 1965. It was on 646 acres in Flushing Meadows, Queens, built on what was basically a swamp and a garbage dump. It was the scene of the 1939 World's Fair, which was almost twice the size.
Really?
Okay. There were over 140 pavilions, 110 restaurants. The pavilions represented approximately 80 nations and 45 corporations. The centerpiece of the New York World's Fair was the Unisphere, which is one of the only things that is still standing. It was a 12-story high stainless steel model of the Earth built by United States Steel, and it was built on the foundation of the Perisphere and the Trilon, which were the centerpiece of the 1939 World's Fair. Having given you the magnitude of this thing, what do you think the admission was?
Goodness. I mean, we went as kids. And if it was super expensive like Disney is today, I know we would not have been able to go. So I'm going to guess, I don't know, $5 a person?
$2.
Okay.
$2.
$2.
$2. And the second season, because they were losing money, they raised it to $2.50.
Okay.
Again, with the price of a Six Flags or a Disney, it's chump change.
Sure. But back then, you got to realize, back then, you could go to a Broadway play for like maybe $5 or $10. You know, you could go to the movies for $1. So this was, I think it was probably in line with a normal expenditure.
There were 51 million people that attended the fair over the 2 years.
I was one.
I was one.
Okay, that's 2 accounted
and,
for.
It lost money the first year, it lost money the second year, because while 51 million sounds like a lot of people, they needed 70 million to break even. So who were the companies that were represented? And we're going to show some pictures of different pavilions here.
Right.
NCR, National Cash Register, and IBM. And in their displays, you could see mainframe computer terminals with keyboards, CRT, cathode ray tube displays, punch cards, telephone modems. And of course, this was decades before the internet became ubiquitous in American homes.
Yep.
Vatican City had an exhibit there.
Absolutely. I remember that one.
And they hosted Michelangelo's Pietà.
Yes. Which a lot of our listeners remarked on, which you'll hear later.
They had to get permission from Pope John the 23rd. They had a Belgian Village. And this was really popular. And what do you think the big hit of the Belgian Village was?
I actually know this.
Yeah,
Belgian waffles.
that's right. Maurice Vermeersch and his wife made the Belgian waffles. And they got to be very, very popular all over the country because of this. And what is a Belgian waffle?
I don't know what makes it any different from a regular waffle.
It's a waffle with whipped cream and strawberries. And
Okay.
that's
what makes
that
it
was the Belgian waffle.
I was thinking there was something different in the batter itself or whatever.
There was the United States Pavilion, which I believe is one of the last buildings still standing. And that featured what was called the Challenge to Greatness. And it had highlights of President Johnson's Great Society proposals. They also had the U.S. Space Park. Did you see the Space Park?
Yes, I did.
And they had 2 acres, sponsored by NASA and the U.S. Defense Department. They had the Gemini capsule.
Right?
They had the Mercury capsule. They had some of the rocket engines on display. They had models of the Mariner, the Echo, and the Telstar satellite.
I remember they had it almost like a part of the exhibit was like a park-like setting, and you could walk amongst the. It wasn't in a building, in other words, as far as I remember, and you walked among these exhibits outside, and I think I probably should have looked before this, but I think we have a photo of myself, my father, and my sister standing in front of one of the exhibits of like a space capsule.
They also had, and this one I think is one of the exhibits that a lot of people remember, and that was the New York State Pavilion, which fell into ruins. And in the last few years, they have spent millions of dollars to try and save it and refurbish it. You might recall it was a big circular structure, and it had a sort of a canopy over it. They called it a tent. And the canopy was in all different colors. On the floor, they had a giant map of the state of New York. It was actually a Texaco driving map. And then there were 3 tall towers.
Those I remember.
Right? There was a shorter one, a middle one, and a real high one. And they had restaurants in them. And unfortunately, the colored canopy was destroyed by vandals decades ago. A lot of the fresco on the floor of the map did not survive. The place has been painted. They have really cool lighting effects on it now. You cannot go up into the towers. They're hoping to maybe be able to do that sometime in the future, but they've spent a huge amount of money. The pavilion, the New York State Pavilion, measured 350 feet by 250 feet. So this thing was big.
Yeah.
And it was supported by 16 100-foot concrete columns. The fair was so big that they calculated it would take you 30 days to see everything.
And that's not accounting for lines at exhibits. That would be just the amount of time it takes to
And
go
the
through
lines,
it.
of course, were monumental. Walt Disney was involved. He was involved in some of the design work on the Ford, the General Motors, the Pepsi display, and also the Illinois State Pavilion. And the Pepsi display was actually the debut of Disney's It's a Small World
I was
ride.
going to say that, yes.
Disney was hoping to, after the World's Fair closed, to use it as the original Disney World. It was going to be in Flushing Meadows, New York, and then that never came to fruition, and it wound up being built in Florida.
Oh, okay. I know he was scoping out and using the World's Fair as sort of like a guinea pig for some of his ideas that he hoped to bring either to Disneyland out in California, or he was already planning Disney World. And so he was testing out some of his ideas in using the World's Fair as his testing lab.
The most popular exhibits were, in order, General Motors. which I didn't get to see. Vatican was number 2, believe it or not.
Okay.
Okay. I don't think the Vatican could pull that off today with the way things have gone for them. The New York State Pavilion was number 3. It is very fondly remembered by people.
Well, I think because of the fact that the people that are remembering are New Yorkers,
Yeah.
and New Jersey tri-staters, that would have been one that they would make sure that they had gone to see.
Chrysler followed that.
Okay.
And the Chrysler Pavilion had a big, it was done up in the form of a giant V8 engine.
Right, right.
Okay, General Electric, Ford, the state of Florida, Bell Telephone Company, and I think that was the debut of the Princess Telephone at the World's Fair, wasn't it?
I don't know if it was a debut, but I remember that the exhibit was in the shape of a princess phone.
And they also had picture phone,
Right.
which of course everybody has now on their
Right,
on
right.
their cell phone.
Which they predicted.
Yeah.
They didn't predict necessarily a cell phone, but they predicted that by, the turn of the century, everybody would be able to have photo phones.
And they had booths there where you could call one another
Right, right.
and see each other to show you how it worked. IBM, Kodak, DuPont, and Johnson Wax. A family company. They were among the most viewed
Okay.
exhibits. Now, you and I have a connection to the Westinghouse exhibit, don't we?
Yes, we do.
And I can't even remember what it was. There were like 3 discs that it was under. And there was like a tower over each one that had the W Westinghouse logo. What was going on in the actual exhibit, I don't remember. But the star of the show was
The time capsule, that's right.
they had a time capsule there from the 1939 World's Fair and one that was going to be buried after the 65.
Right.
They are buried 50 feet underground,
Okay.
I think in a lead casing or something, and they are supposed to be down there for the next 5,000 years.
Really? I thought they were going to dig it up sooner.
Yeah.
But at any rate, both of our names are in that capsule.
Yep.
We had never even met at that point.
Yeah, we were kids. We were like, what, 10 years old?
Yeah. So,
But you could sign your name, and they would, I guess they would microfilm it or something and put it in the
I don't know,
in the
it
capsule.
was a book, and you just, like you would sign into, somebody's funeral or wedding or whatever. It was just like
Because the capsules weren't, they were long.
yeah.
I think they were 7 feet long or something, but they kind of looked like a torpedo.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how they were going to actually package this stuff, but it was interesting because they showed you what was in the 1939 capsule as things that they thought future people would
Right.
want to would tell the story of what life was like in the 30s.
And what they had in there, some of what they had various samples of different fabrics and different metals. They also had historical things on microfilm. And they also had a number of issues of Look magazine
Okay.
in that time capsule. So both of those time capsules are over in Flushing, Queens now. And
50 feet
buried
underground.
50 feet underground. And hopefully, if we're still here, well, we won't be here. But if the human race is here 5,000 years from now, they're supposed to open it up and see how screwed up we were. Or maybe how good things were. Who knows?
The apes will will take it up.
So we asked a number of you on Facebook when we announced that we were going to record this show to share your reminiscences about the World's Fair. Mm-hmm. So let's share some of these little nuggets.
Nuggets of chicken nuggets.
Okay, James Heckle said the 1939 fair featured a giant model of what would become the interstate highway system of the future, complete with clover leaves and moving vehicles. Visitors laughed, and no, I wasn't there. He knew,
like our
he
age,
knew
yeah.
he knew I was going to say that probably. He said, but his wife's mother was.
And Marilyn McCarthy said that she went to the fair. Her mother, sister Joanne, and she stayed This is my cousin speaking, so it was at my grandparents' house. And my cousins are from Massachusetts, and it's rather rural where they are. So she calls us city folk. She said, all you city folk thought nothing of hopping on a train to get where you wanted to go. We, your country cousins, had never been on a train anywhere. My mom was quite influential in assuring us that it was no big deal and drove us to a train station with directions on how to get to the fair. They made it there and enjoyed many sights and even made it back to my grandparents' house in Orange. Elizabeth Genazio went several times and brought more friends. She remembers the Sphere and the futuristic phones that we were talking about,
Right.
and lots of walking in the hot sun.
Nikki Summers writes, I was there. I was 8 years old, and the thing that I remember the most was the Pietà. It was, for those of you who do not know what the Pietà is, it is a sculpture of the Virgin Mary holding the body of the murdered Jesus.
Right, after they took him down
After
from the
they
cross.
took him down from the cross. And it is a very moving sculpture.
And beautifully done.
It's gorgeous. It is absolutely gorgeous. And she says, we were not allowed to get close to it and could only see it from a moving staircase, if I remember correctly. That's right. They had a conveyor belt and you went past it, but you couldn't get near it. She says it may have been even encased in glass. I think it was. But it amazed me, she says. Even as a child, I realized the beauty of the artwork and how talented a human being could be to make something look so lifelike out of stone. I remember the Future World or something similar exhibit and how neat it seemed to me, but I don't actually remember what they had there and they said was part of the future. Finally, I remember eating dinner in China. In China. I love hot mustard, always have loved hot mustard, and had much experience with it even at only 8 years old. We ate a lot of Chinese food at home. I think I scared the crap out of our waiter who saw me taking the egg roll that he had just delivered being dunked into hot mustard and making its way into my mouth. I don't know. It sounds good to me. I figured he thought I didn't know how hot it was, and he ran over yelling something in Chinese. Meanwhile, my family and I were looking at him like, what's the problem? I remember he left a glass of water for me at the table and walked away mumbling something still in Chinese. Ah, the good times. And oh yeah, the traffic we went through to get home. I remember that too, and my dad complaining constantly. Well, there's two dads that were pissed off.
Okay, John Panjoki. We really loved it. It's a Small World was one of his favorites, and viewing the Pietà was also amazing. The huge metal globe, which is the Unisphere, was
Right.
cool. He wanted to climb on it, and he said that's what he remembers most. He was 8 or 9 at the time.
Cindy Watson says, I remember going and walking and lots of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, there was lots of stuff.
Erwin Fox says, I went in 1964 with my brother and parents and loved the Unisphere and all the exhibits. In 1965, I went back with my brother and mother. I left our box camera in the tire exhibit and went back later for it, and someone actually turned it in, and I still have the pictures from it.
Tire exhibit, I think, was U.S. Rubber, Uniroyal.
It was a Uniroyal, but that was
Yeah.
the one that was like a giant tire that was a Ferris
It was
wheel.
a Ferris wheel, right. Richard Linsenman writes, I remember the Ford exhibit where I got a glow-in-the-dark Ford emblem and standing on a moving ramp to see Michelangelo's Pietà.
Two different exhibits.
Yeah.
Wasn't the Ford exhibit did not have Michelangelo.
Mary drove a Ford. Okay, folks, she had a Fairlane.
And Lois Doucette Godfreyo went often. My mom liked The Small World. We saw every exhibit of every country. We saw Lincoln in the Illinois exhibit several times. Little did I know that my future sister-in-law, Robin, was working at the Illinois exhibit at the time.
Barbara Gamino says, my whole family, 6 kids, 2 parents went. We had once lived on Long Island, or is that Long Island? And my father still worked out of New York City, so we drove from the Philly area to the fairgrounds. I love the exhibit that showed the House of the Future, which, by the way, was underground.
Right.
And it is believed that it is still buried beneath
Right,
the
'cause
fair.
they said it was too much trouble to try and
So it is the House of
demolish
Tomorrow.
it.
I'm sure there's guys out there with, you know,
Geiger counters. or
Geiger
something,
counters
yeah.
or some kind of, the thing that you look for jewelry on
Yeah,
the beach
wasn't-
with.
Yeah.
They're probably out there trying to figure out where that thing is. I love the exhibit that showed the House of the Future making and melting down dinnerware instead of washing dishes. And we love the car that drove in the water.
Okay, I don't remember the car.
I don't
driving in the
remember
water,
that.
but I would imagine it must be something like that duck vehicle that they have now.
Yeah.
That you can take tours and the thing goes from land to water and back onto land.
By the way, we have here, this was one of the things that you could get at the World's Fair. I'm going to hold it up to our camera here, but we also have a still of this that we took so you can see it better. But it is a dime, and it says New York World's Fair 1964-65 neutron irradiated dime.
Yes, that was one of my souvenirs.
So it's supposed to be radioactive.
It was.
Let's find out. Let's hold it near the microphone. Wow. This thing might still be hot for all we know.
Well, it's supposed to be.
Listen to that. Wow. Maybe we should keep that in a lead-lined box or
I'm
something.
sure if it is really still radioactive, I'm sure the amount of radioactivity is so minor that
Yeah.
you don't need to worry about it.
Maybe we should turn the lights out in here and see if it glows.
But that was kind of a neat thing because you put a dime in the machine, it irradiated it, and then it put it in this blue plastic thing, and it spit it back out to you, and that was a souvenir for a dime. I believe you could put it like under a machine, and it would do the Geiger counter sound, and to show you that it really was officially irradiated.
Marie Zach says, I belong to the OLC Ramblers Drum Corps, and we had several dates performing there.
Right, and Dale Farrell, her dad took her twice. She said it was magical. They saw the Pietà, they had the Belgian waffles, and he bought a dinosaur from the Sinclair machine.
That's right. Sinclair had the Dino Land
Yes.
because they said that Sinclair gasoline was dino power or something because the fossils of dinosaurs
Yeah.
became the crude oil. So they had the Sinclair Dino Land with these big dinosaurs.
Dinosaur was the symbol of Sinclair.
Right.
Just like Shell has the shell, Sinclair had the dinosaur all the time. And Kathy Panjoki said The Small World was her favorite, and she would have spent her whole time writing it if her folks let her. She liked the Hall of the Presidents, the Trip Through Time, Homes of the Past, Present, and Future. And she says, I'm still waiting for those future homes. I don't remember the Pietà, but I did want to ride the monorail and never got to. And I still have a cup from the World's Fair.
Patty Del Gurcio. My parents took us quite often. My favorites were the Pietà and the Carousel of Progress, which I think was General Motors.
I think that's what they were talking about
Yeah.
with the homes of the past, present, and future, which I believe actually then became part of Epcot, or a
That's
similar,
right, because we saw that.
or a similar type of thing.
Yeah.
If it wasn't the exact exhibit, they reenacted it in Epcot.
Yeah, well, as I said, Disney was very involved
Right.
at the World's Fair, and it was, part of it was kind of like the prototype for stuff that he would do in the future.
Right. And Michelle Petruca Sauer remembers the phone booth and video phones. She said huge things.
Robert J. Carson III says, that's me in front of my sister. Did he send a photo or something?
He sent a photo.
Okay. I remember the Pietà in a dark room with a spotlight shining on it. The Ford Mustang, that's right, they had the Mustang on display there. I think it was the year that they were coming out with it.
I think so.
Right, I think the gearheads in the audience will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it came out in like 64. Belgian waffles, of course, and so much more. We lived in Queens, and my dad worked for SAS, which was the airline. So he got free passes for them. My big sister was always there and collected pins from all the companies. Well, good for her. That's
probably.
I'd like to see that.
I would too. I don't remember having pins. Mary Beth Gardner Yes, we went a couple of times at least. Relatives came to visit, and we would bring them to the fair. A friend's uncle had designed the round globe that was at the entrance.
Really?
Yep. And I think it's still there. She says, yes, it is.
Yes, it is. It's doing quite
I
well.
loved the restaurants that served authentic international cuisine and the exhibits. I don't think the U.S. could afford to do a World's Fair again during these austerity times.
Kathy Flynn wrote, as best as I recall, we went only once. There would have probably been 7 of us kids and 2 parents by that time. I remember the Ford exhibit. Of course, the Ford exhibit did feature a car that was found on the roadside dead.
Oh, no, it did not.
Well, there goes any sponsorship that we might ever have had from Ford.
Yeah. And Linda Fowler says that it was the first time she had Belgian waffles.
Howard Weiss says, yes, went 4 times. Twice with the family, twice on a school trip. One time we saw Gordon Cooper, one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts. Another time we met Tina Louise.
All right.
Who was?
The
movie
star on Gilligan's Island. And India Clemens says she went and remembers the futuristic cars, telephones, etc. that were displayed in the different pavilions. And she says, we're living that vision now, and many of those goods either existed or have become obsolete or have been highly improved technology that we use today. It was a fascinating experience back then and a good memory now. I have to agree with that.
Abby Kane says, I grew up in Queens, and so yes, many times. First time on a school trip, we were allowed to go off with our friends. Our glee club got to sing there, and we just had to show up at a certain time. Great memories.
So our listeners really chimed in on that, and you can still comment below, and maybe if we get enough comments, we'll share them on our next podcast.
Now, the comment question that I have for you all
Y'all,
is,
all y'all.
do you think that it would be possible to do a World's Fair of this magnitude in the United States today? And I want you to comment down below if you're watching on YouTube, please. If you want to comment on AOL, we have our AOL site, the Sonic Boomers at AOL.com.
Email.
My take on it is we will not see this in the United States again. And I'm sorry about that, because I'd love to see it. I think we need it. But here's the thing. The cost would be prohibitive to do something of that magnitude. The price of the ticket would be so high, people wouldn't be able to afford it. You think Disney's expensive? I think something of this magnitude might be even much more expensive.
It probably
than
would,
Disney.
especially if it had the designation that it was only going to be open for a year or two. You know, Disney can recoup some of its money
because it's open
it's a
in
permanent
perpetuity.
fixture. But something that's only limited to a 2 year, even if they said 5 years,
Yeah.
it would still be really,
You're not
going to
make up what it cost you.
As it is, this World's Fair did not make any money.
And the other thing is, I would be very concerned about violence, about fights, about riots. Unfortunately, in our country, we are at one another's throats these days.
I don't know. I wouldn't be as. I mean, I'd be cautious, of course.
Yeah.
But we have amusement parks. We have Disneyland. We have Walt Disney World. We have Epcot. We have Universal, and they're not grounds for violence. I don't think that it would be a grounds for violence.
I think it would be like throwing cats in a bag.
I don't think so. I don't think what would make this different than all those other exhibits. It's a much more violent world, a much more dark world, but I just don't think that this would be any different than other places that you can go with your family.
All right.
That's
All right.
my take.
That's your take, and you're sticking to it.
And I'm sticking to it. And of course, well, neither one of us will ever know who's right because they're not going to do it.
No, I don't see it happening. Certainly not in our lifetimes. So comment below. Would you like to see another World's Fair in New York? Let's hear from you.
Yes, please do.
So is that it? Are we wrapped up on the business
that's
for
it.
this one?
That's it.
Thank you for listening to and watching show number 116 of the Sonic Boomers podcast. And until next time, I'm Pete Torriello.
And I'm Maureen Torriello.
Goodbye.
Bye.